It's good to take a little bit of a stock take in respect of this bill, where both sides sit, not only in the things they disagree with, but the things that they do agree with. So what we know is that in the course of the last government, they produced a Children and Young Persons and Their Families Amendment Bill, and there were a number of things within that bill which National agreed with it, and there were some things that they didn't agree with, and the same goes Vicky Verkey in respect of this one. So what we know is that both sides of the House agree that supervision with activity and supervision with residence orders aren't long enough. They're not long enough to do any good, because we find that people who are sentenced to or ordered to attend supervision with residence courses end up doing several of them back to back. They get released too soon for the same reasons that the Minister outlined, because they take 8 weeks or so to get to court. By the time they've done that, they've only got 3 weeks, given time already served, they've only got 3 weeks to go, and they're out before there's any real intervention. And while they're there on remand, the staff involved in looking after those facilities are only able to insist on compliance in so many things. So in actual fact, what is intended to be, say, a 3-month course as a maximum ends up being 3 weeks in what they can actually do. So both Labor and National agree that they should be extended out. And their bill said so, and our bill said so, so there's no real scrap there. The next thing is the argument about what works and what doesn't work. Well, what we know that what doesn't work is locking people up and doing nothing with them for a period of time. So in the extension of supervision with activity under Labor's bill and under National's bill, the deal was we were going to do more with the kids while we had them to make those things worthwhile. Labor agreed with that and National agreed with that. And when we had the Principal Youth Court Judge Andrew Beecroft come before the Select Committee, he agreed that the courses that were working out in the community, supervision with activity, for instance, that were very good were those that had some what we call wraparound things. So they addressed drug and alcohol, they addressed violence, they addressed literacy and numeracy while they could, they addressed family relationships, they intervened with family relationships, made sure that they brought family into the programs, and a prime example of that is one within my electorate, which is Start Taranaki. And when she was Minister of Social Welfare, the Honourable Ruth Dyson agreed with that. She extended the funding for that and enabled that to be able to go on to produce far better results. And we know from actual measures that 65% of the young people who attended that particular course never offended again, because they were checked up on, they knew whether or not they were offending again, they monitored the court, they had mentors placed with them, and what do you know, they were there because they were ordered to be there. Yes, they had to consent, and both Labor and National agreed in both bills that the consent provision for community-based sentences should be taken away, removed from young people as a right. So we actually, both sides of the House, agree that young people should be compelled to attend these courses, because it was in Labor's bill and it's in our bill. So let's not squabble over that, because it's actually common ground. And what we found then, that going back to Start Taranaki, 65% of the young people who attend that course and complete the course, and that's virtually everybody in the numbers that they were producing, never offended again. 15% of them left the course, within a month committed a dumb crime at a lesser level of what they actually went there for, and after that never offended again. And 20% went on to have a pretty horrific sort of record of offending, but an 80% relative success rate out of all those attenders is actually bloody good. And what should we do? Both sides of the House agree we should replicate that around the country. So whether it's supervision with residence or supervision with activity, we both agree, both sides of this debate agree that we should extend those programs, and we should make sure that those programs are more than just having kids either walking around the bush and then doing menial tasks or sitting in a cell. We should actually do something with those young people while we should. Now, a point that we also agree in is that there should be an extended period of supervision after these course is finished. The argument we're having now is what level of close monitoring or intensive monitoring there should be. Another huge argument around here is what we do with 12 and 13-year-olds. Now, initially we had the response from the Principal Youth Court Judge, who came along and said, look, you're not talking about a whole truckload of 12 and 13-year-olds, Mr. Chair.
Morris.
You're actually talking about a relatively small group of 12 and 13-year-olds who need to be dealt with because they are offending at a far more sophisticated level. And what we mean by that is it's not a huge escalation in numbers, but it is a huge escalation in the seriousness of violent offences that they've been committed, and we are seeing a change in the trend across gender. So we're seeing young girls offending far more violently than they have in the past, and we have to do something about it. Now, National's response to that was, let's put them in front of the youth court because they've got a wider range of orders that can be given and a wider range of resolutions that can be offered. And the principal youth court judge said, actually, you're wrong. Because what you really need is you need to be able to move the powers of the family court into the youth court because the youth court resolutions are too short. But what we found was that the scope of this bill was that we couldn't do that. And the other thing he said when we looked at doing that and said, well, let's get some of those, he also said it'd be quite good if the family court could exercise some of the provisions that are only available within the youth court jurisdiction. And actually, there wasn't a hell of a lot of disagreement across the parties in respect of that either. But when we wanted to do that, what did we find? And those of you who were sitting on the committee will know, we found that we weren't able to do it under this piece of legislation. And so the Minister has said, OK, let's have a look at what we can do with family court jurisdiction further on down the track. But the big point that Andrew Beecroft made was this, that the real detraction from putting 12 and 13-year-olds before the family court is the slow and cumbersome way that the family court works. So he said, fix it. So he said, make it more streamlined. And so we said, OK, what about Principal Youth Court Judge, what about we have the opportunity to bring 12 and 13-year-olds to the Youth Court, and the Youth Court Judge acts as a man on a drafting gate deciding whether the level of offending that this young person, this 12 and 13-year-old is doing, should be dealt with back in the family court or should move on to the Youth Court. And he said that that was a way of streamlining the system that would add confidence of those practitioners who are using it, and he agreed with that process. The other big thing that we've had huge debate about across party is what we call Fresh Start camps and others prefer to call boot camps. Okay? Now what we said then was this. Let's have a wee listen for a minute. What we said then was this. OK, what we know works is we've got that basically we want to take supervision with activity, combine it with supervision with residents, but take account of the security needs of those high-end offenders who are going to be part of that. But what we want to include in this Fresh Start thing, you call them boot camps on the other side of the house, we call them Fresh Start camps. I concede that the Prime Minister on one occasion referred to them as boot camps. I'll concede that. Just to get you to shut up for a minute and listen to the argument, OK? So the point is that we were going to amalgamate what is supervision with activity with supervision with residents, and there are a whole lot of other stuff in there that bears absolutely no resemblance at all to corrective training, which was boot camps way back in your day and my day, back into the 80s. That was what boot camps were, and as we have described Fresh Start camps, I'm sure now that you're enlightened, they bear no resemblance at all, and even, Principal Youth Court Judge Beecroft agreed with us. What we have, as we have outlined the Fresh Start program, it bears no resemblance to corrective training and no resemblance to what he called boot camps when he condemned them. Thank you for listening. I look forward to further calls on this debate.